The recruits mocked the janitor, old, hunched, always silent. To them, he was a nobody, until the captain walked in, saluted him, and said, "General." From that moment on, nothing at the base was ever the same. It happened in the middle of lunch. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual mix of trays clattering and young men joking far too loudly. At a back table, a group of recruits burst into laughter as the janitor passed, pushing his mop cart with the same tired precision as always. One of them mimicked his slow gait. Another made a crude joke about his smell. No one stopped them. Why would they? He was just the janitor, the quiet old man who scrubbed their messes and never met their eyes. But that day, something cracked. The moment the captain entered, the air shifted. He moved straight toward the janitor, heels clicking against the linoleum floor. And then, a pause, a deep breath. He snapped into a crisp salute. "General," he said, voice low but steady. Every fork stopped mid-air. Every head turned. Laughter died so quickly it felt like the room had forgotten how to breathe. The janitor didn't respond. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply gave a slow, respectful nod and returned to pushing his cart, as if nothing had happened. But in that instant, every pair of eyes on him saw something different. Not a janitor, not a joke. A mystery. Fort Leonard, Missouri, in early spring smelled like bleach and boot polish. The recruits, still fresh from civilian life, found ways to burn off nervous energy between drills, usually by mocking anything or anyone beneath them. And there was no one lower, in their minds, than the janitor. He was easy to pick on, thin as a rail, with shoulders that slumped like they carried a weight no one else could see. His gray coveralls hung loose on his frame, stained with time and ammonia. He never spoke, never looked anyone in the eye. He moved like a ghost through the corridors, pushing his mop and bucket with robotic precision. Recruits called him Gramps, or Corporal Cobweb. They mimicked his slow shuffle through paper towels in the hallway just to watch him pick them up. One even left a trail of muddy footprints on purpose, smirking as the janitor quietly cleaned them up. No reaction, no complaint, not even a glance. His silence made it worse. It gave their cruelty more space to echo. Private Danny Brooks was the loudest, barely 19, with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. He loved an audience. "Bet that guy hasn't done a single thing in his life," he sneered one afternoon. "Probably just wandered in off the street and never left." They laughed. Loud, careless laughter that filled the hall and bounced off the concrete walls. But the janitor didn't even flinch. He just kept moving, mop swishing quietly behind him, eyes fixed on the floor like he was erasing something only he could see. What none of them noticed, what none of them could have noticed, was the way the base's senior staff never laughed, the way they nodded at him when they passed, the way he avoided their gaze, too, but with something closer to guilt than humility. And then, one afternoon, someone from the senior staff left an envelope on the janitor's cart. Just a plain manila envelope. He didn't open it. He just slipped it into his pocket and kept mopping. That night, Private Brooks found it impossible to sleep. He kept thinking about the envelope, and about the way the janitor moved like he was remembering something no one else dared to. The next morning, Brooks watched the janitor pause in front of a display case in the hallway, the one with the medals and old photos. He stared at it for a long time. Then, with one finger, he gently touched the glass, right next to a black and white photo labeled Operation Iron Veil, -1983. His name wasn't listed, but his face was there. The janitor's name was never spoken out loud, at least not by the recruits. To them, he was just the old guy, a fixture like the benches or the vending machine that never worked. But now, after the envelope and the photo, Private Brooks watched him differently. He began to notice things others didn't. The way the janitor checked the corners of every room like someone trained in security. How he never walked with his back to a doorway. How he folded the rags in perfect squares, like uniforms waiting for inspection. There was order in everything he did, a strange, almost reverent respect for the tools he used. A mop wasn't just a mop. It was something to be held right, cleaned after use, stored neatly, as if it mattered. Once, Brooks saw him cleaning the latrine, a job no one envied, and the old man moved with calm precision, hands steady despite the tremor in his fingers. He cleaned the mirror as if preparing it for someone important. There was no music, no humming, no complaint, just motion, just silence, the kind that wraps around you like fog. Others kept laughing, but their voices were thinner now. A few even stopped. Brooks told himself it was curiosity that made him linger near the janitor's route that week, not guilt, not shame. He even tried to strike up a conversation once. "Rough day, huh?" he muttered, standing near the supply closet. The janitor didn't answer, just handed him a broom and nodded toward the hallway. No lecture, no words, just an invitation. Brooks swept in silence for 15 minutes before realizing the janitor had disappeared. That evening, while polishing his boots, Brooks kept turning one question over in his mind. Why would someone with that face, that presence, choose to become invisible? Later that night, while sneaking a soda from the mess hall fridge, Brooks overheard two sergeants talking. One of them said, "I still can't believe he came back here after what happened in Kandahar." The other replied, "You think they know who he is?" And then, in a hush, "They wouldn't dare mock him if they did." Word travels fast in a base full of bored recruits and lockdown curiosity. But nothing spread faster than what happened that Thursday in the mess hall. It was taco day, the one lunch everyone actually looked forward to. The line stretched down the hallway, and the air smelled like seasoned beef and sour cream. Brooks and a few others sat near the far end, laughing at a story someone told about a drill gone wrong. The janitor moved between tables quietly, wiping down trays and discarded napkins. Business as usual. Until the door opened, and the captain walked in. Captain Rollins wasn't a man you joked around with. He had that air about him, firm voice, straight spine, eyes that could slice through stone. Usually, when he entered a room, recruits jumped to attention, or at least dropped their voices. But this time, he didn't head to the officer's table. He didn't grab a tray. He didn't even glance at the food line. He walked straight across the mess hall, past dozens of eyes now fixed on him, and stopped in front of the janitor. And then he saluted. A full, proper salute. Hand to brow, back straight. No hesitation. "General," he said, clear and steady. "It's good to see you, sir." You could hear a pin drop. The janitor looked up, startled, the only emotion anyone had ever seen in his eyes. He returned the salute, not sharply, but respectfully. And without a word, he went back to wiping the table. Brooks' stomach flipped. Around him, nobody spoke. One of the recruits whispered, "What the hell just happened?" But no one answered, because nobody knew. Later that day, the whispers exploded. "General, was that a joke? Is he really someone?" The laughter that had once followed the janitor down every hallway was gone, replaced by awkward silence and sideways glances. Now, when he passed, recruits stood a little straighter, though they didn't know why. Brooks sat on his bunk that night, replaying the moment over and over. That salute hadn't been for show. It had weight, recognition, maybe even regret. Unable to resist, Brooks stayed late after lights out and slipped into the archives room. He pulled up the base's historical files, typed in general, and the year listed in the photo frame -1983. After a few seconds, a classified folder appeared on screen, but the name stamped across the top wasn't redacted. It read, Colton E. Harlan, Brigadier General. Status, honorably discharged. Voluntary silence. After the salute, everything changed, but no one said it out loud. The recruits still went to drills, still cleaned their bunks, still griped about early mornings and blistered feet. But something had cracked in the air, and everyone felt it. They stopped mocking the janitor. Not out of kindness, but because they didn't know who they were mocking anymore. Brooks became obsessed. Every spare minute, he scoured the base's internal network, sifting through old records and mission logs. Most of the good stuff was locked behind clearance levels he didn't have, but here and there, pieces slipped through. Mentions of Operation Iron Veil, a list of commendations under the name Harlan, Bronze Star, Distinguished Service Medal, 2 Purple Hearts. Still, nothing explained why a general would mop floors and clean urinals. No demotion, no disgrace on record, just ... disappearance. At lunch, Brooks caught the janitor's eye for a split second. Something flashed there, not anger or recognition, but a quiet understanding, the look you give someone who's asking the right question, even if they don't know how to say it yet. Whispers bloomed among the other recruits. Maybe he lost his mind. Maybe he did something awful. Maybe he's here to watch us like a secret test. But nobody had the nerve to approach him, not since the captain had called him sir. Brooks began noticing the captain, too. How Rollins sometimes glanced toward the janitor with something like respect, or was it guilt? One day, Brooks lingered near the officers' hall and overheard a brief conversation between two majors. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" one asked. "Not unless he forgives himself," the other replied. "And that man holds on to guilt like it's a job." The next morning, Brooks tried again. He left a folded note on the janitor's cart. "Why here? Why now?" The note disappeared. No reply came. But that evening, Brooks found an old, worn military ID card slipped under his pillow. The photo was young, sharp, intense. The name was unmistakable: Colton Harlan. On the back of the card, in faded ink, were 4 words that rattled Brooks to his core: "I watched them die." Private Brooks barely slept that night. He stared at the ID card under the faint light of his desk lamp, trying to reconcile the man in the photo, sharped uniform, crisp, ribbons lined with precision, with the one who swept the halls. In silence, the card felt like a confession, or maybe a challenge. He didn't show it to anyone, not yet. Instead, he started retracing steps, digging for anything that might paint the rest of the picture. There were whispers of soldiers who served under Harlan, older officers who still limped slightly or carried a weight in their voices when they talked about past campaigns. Brooks sought them out with questions he disguised as curiosity. One sergeant, mid-50s, scar across his cheek, let something slip. "Colton Harlan was the kind of leader who made you feel invincible," he said, almost in a whisper. "You'd follow that man into hell because he never once let us down." Until he stopped there, jaw tight, and then walked off. In the base library, tucked behind a row of dusty binders, Brooks found an old magazine, Veterans Journal, 1985. The cover story was about ghost tactics in the Middle East, featuring a shadowy profile of a commander credited with rescuing 2 squads trapped behind enemy lines. The name wasn't listed, but the photo's silhouette was unmistakable. Even shadowed, it was the janitor's posture: shoulders forward, arms firm, chin down. Brooks knew it. Later that week, Brooks dared to follow the janitor outside. He kept his distance, watching from the edge of the drill yard as the old man stood alone near the flagpole. He wasn't cleaning, he wasn't watching, he just stood, like he was listening for something only he could hear. That night, Brooks returned to the mess hall and stared at the black and white group photo from Operation Iron Veil. This time, he saw it differently. The expressions on the soldiers' faces: young, tense, proud, and in the center, Harlan, eyes forward, jaw set, a man with the full weight of lives on his shoulders. Brooks noticed something for the first time. One soldier in the photo had a red X drawn over his chest. Someone had marked him. And beneath the photo's frame, barely visible unless you looked closely, someone had etched a date in the wood: March 14, 1983. "We shouldn't have survived." The story finally started to take shape, in fragments, in whispers, in haunted silences. Captain Rollins called Brooks into his office late on a Tuesday. No reprimand, no orders, just a chair, a long pause, and a man deciding whether to peel opened a wound that had never healed. "You've been looking into him," Rollins said, not unkindly. Brooks didn't deny it. "He's not just a janitor." Rollins gave a half smile, more grief than humor. "No, he's not." He leaned back, hands steepled. Colton Harlan was the kind of officer men would follow into fire. But he was also human, which meant, when things went wrong, he didn't forgive himself the way the rest of us tried to. Then he told the story. In 1983, during a covert operation deep in enemy territory, Harlan was tasked with pulling 2 stranded units out of a canyon ambush. It was a mission that should have been suicide. But he pulled it off, at a cost. 12 men made it out. 5 didn't. One of them was his best friend. Another was barely 18. "He made the call," Rollins said. "The kind of call you only make once. To save the many, you leave a few behind." But Harlan never accepted that math. He started calling it murder in his own head. Brooks sat quietly, the weight of it all settling like dust in his lungs. He turned down promotion, requested discharge, never asked for honors, never answered calls from DC. Then, one day, years later, he showed up at this base, asked for janitorial work. Rollins looked Brooks in the eye. He didn't want to be a soldier anymore. He wanted to carry the burden in silence. So we let him. There was no ceremony, no announcement, no story pinned to the bulletin board. Just a man with a mop, atoning in his own way. Before Brooks left, Rollins handed him a faded piece of folded paper. He left this in my office the day he arrived. Brooks opened it. In neat block letters, it read, "Honor is earned in the dark, not in the parade." It rained the day it happened. A brutal, sideways rain that soaked through fatigues and turned the training grounds to mud. Brooks could barely keep his footing during drills, but his mind wasn't on the rain. It was on the man who, for all these weeks, had swept the hallways like a ghost, burdened by memory. Something felt off that morning. The janitor hadn't shown up for his usual rounds. No mop cart. No clang of the bucket wheels on tile. Just absence, for someone the base had spent months ignoring. His silence now echoed loudly. Brooks found him later, not in the barracks, not near the supply closet, but behind the old motor pool, standing in the rain, drenched to the bone. He held a small, tattered notebook in one hand, its pages streaked with water. Brooks didn't say anything at first. He just approached, slow, unsure if the man even noticed he was there. Finally, the janitor spoke. His voice was raw, quieter than Brooks expected. Used to stand like this in Kandahar, after a mission, just trying to feel again. Brooks waited. The storm filled the silence. I left them behind. They were calling my name. I heard it through the gunfire, and I left. He didn't look at Brooks, just stared ahead, eyes locked on something far beyond the motor pool. You never forget that kind of sound. Not ever. Brooks felt his throat tighten. You saved 12 lives. I ended 5. The man gripped the notebook tighter. They were kids. Kids who trusted me. Brooks stepped closer. You came back here. You faced it every day. That's not cowardice. That's something else. The janitor's shoulders sagged further, like the words had chipped away a little more of what was left of him. "They don't need my redemption," he murmured. "They're gone. I cleaned these floors for me, so I never forget what happens when you think you're a god." Just as Brooks was about to leave, the janitor held out the notebook. "You wanted answers," he said. "Read this, but when you're done, burn it." Brooks took it with shaking hands. On the cover, barely visible through the water stains, were the initials CEH. The notebook was a storm, pages soaked with ink, rain, and something heavier, memory etched in jagged handwriting that shifted from disciplined to fractured across the years. Brooks read it in his bunk, under a flashlight, heart pounding like he was trespassing in sacred territory. Each page held fragments, not stories, not confessions, more like broken transmissions from a man who had locked himself inside his own mind. Woke up hearing Grant's voice again. He always sounded calm, even when dying. "You don't forget the smell of burning gear, it clings to your soul. They gave me medals for what I did. I kept the dog tags instead. There were no full names, no battlefield bravado, just pain, honest, corrosive, unfiltered. Some pages were blank except for a single word, why. On others, full passages descended into frantic loops of ink, like he'd tried to write something and couldn't. The most striking page, though, was short, clean. I became a janitor to do what I couldn't in the field. Make things clean again." Brooks sat in silence after finishing. He didn't cry, he didn't move, he just let the words settle in his chest like stone. The next morning, something cracked on the base. One of the recruits, Marks, the loudmouth who used to mock the janitor the most, mouthed off during drill. When the sergeant corrected him, he lashed out, "What's it matter? We're just pawns anyway." Like that old janitor freak, the base went still. The janitor, who happened to be sweeping near the barracks, didn't say a word. But this time, he looked up. His eyes met Mark's, not angry, not sad, just ... present. And for the first time, someone confronted him, not with mockery, but challenge. "You think you're better than us?" Marks spat. "Hiding out here, wearing guilt like it's a uniform." Brooks stepped forward, but the janitor raised a hand, barely a gesture, and stepped in front of the recruit. Inches away. "Young man," he said, voice soft as worn leather, "you don't know what you'll carry until the day you have to choose who lives and who dies. Pray you never do." Marks didn't answer. He just backed away, face pale. That night, the notebook was gone from Brooks' locker. In its place was a folded towel, perfectly square, with one sentence stitched in red thread. "You saw me." The janitor never spoke again after that confrontation. Not because he was angry or broken, but because he didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Not in a lecture, not in a uniform, but in the weight of his presence and the silence that followed it. The recruits started to change, subtly, then all at once. Jokes became less cruel. The laughter that once trailed behind the janitor like a mocking chorus fell away. Even Marks, who'd taken pride in his sharp tongue, started helping in the kitchen during cleanup. No one was told to behave differently. They simply did. Brooks began to see everything through a new lens. The way the old man still arrived at 0500 sharp. The way he double-checked locked doors at night. The way he polished the floor beneath the memorial wall more carefully than anywhere else. There was a purpose to it all. Not penance, not punishment, discipline, a kind of sacred routine. On his final morning, the janitor didn't come in. At first, no one said anything. But as the hours passed and the halls remained still, tension built like a held breath. By afternoon, Rollins gathered the senior staff and the recruits in the main hall. No speech, no announcement. Just a clipboard passed from hand to hand, bearing a single slip of paper. Thank you for letting me serve in silence. But it's time I let the dead rest, and myself, too. You know who I was. You know who I chose to become. Don't forget either. The choice is what matters. CEH. There was no parade. No folded flag. Just a hallway now missing its quiet keeper. Brooks stood by the supply closet and stared at the space where the mop cart used to be. On a shelf above, he found one last item. A sealed envelope addressed to the next one. Inside, a handwritten note, 7 words, clean with honor. Lead without needing applause. He folded it and slipped it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Years later, Private Brooks, now Sergeant Brooks, stood before a new batch of recruits, and as one of them made a careless joke about the base janitor, Brooks stopped, looked the kid dead in the eye, and said, "You see that man? Call him sir, and hope you're half the soldier he chose not to be."
If you've made it this far, it means this story touched you in some way. So don't leave without subscribing. It really helps the channel and keeps me motivated to share more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And which part of this story moved you the most?